It's an honour indeed. I'm humbled looking around at the faces here and realising my life experience in aviation is probably minimal compared with a lot. I've always been interested in safety. It's always been my bête noire, if you like, mainly because I'm a bit of a coward. I didn't want to end up in a heap. Also, going through flying training, I found that I was working, like a lot of people, very hard, pedalling very hard to keep ahead of the instructors and being thrown off course. So I had to work very hard, and part of that also was to keep myself safe. So over the years, I've managed to survive. It's probably a strange thing to say, but after 43 years in aviation, 45 if you count my private flying, I'm still perpetually amazed that I'm standing here today. I never thought I would survive, and that's an honest statement. Probably because of the life in the military, Vietnam, just doing a tour of Vietnam, but even subsequent to that, you know, various times, as our previous speaker was talking about, things going wrong, and you get away from it and sit back and relax and think, I survived that. I've learned something from that. Hopefully you've learned something from that. And I was into safety long before these, the large oil companies and the commercial organisations found there was a dollar to be made in it. I believed in it sincerely, not from litigation point of view, but from just being a professional pilot operating your machine safe. Bore you for a couple of minutes. I was born in 1944 in Stratford-on-Avon in the UK. My mother was evacuated there. Mr. Hitler was busily trying to demolish Coventry, which he successfully did. So she was sent to Stratford-on-Avon, where I was born. My father was, like most people, was away in the Second World War, but he was in tanks. He had nothing to do with aircraft at that time, and he was on the beaches in Normandy on D-Day. He was in a Sherman tank. The main one they were up against, of course, was the Tiger tanks. Now, you people probably know more about this than me, but the Sherman tank had a 75mm gun. The Tiger tank had an 88mm gun, which was, in fact, a modified anti-aircraft gun. The 88mm gun of the Germans was an anti-aircraft gun, and it was radar controlled. It was very accurate. And there was there was a saying still going around the British Air Force: the only gun that shot down more aircraft than the 88 were owned by the Royal Navy. Bit of rivalry there. The Sherman tank could not knock off a Tiger tank. Usually it would take they used to say about 5 Sherman tanks to knock off a Tiger, and there was only one would survive. So it was always beholden on them to get out of the way, go and hide somewhere behind a hill, behind a bush tree, anywhere you couldn't be seen by the Tiger tank. The Tiger tank's gun, by the way, had an accurate range of 1.5 kilometres. It could hit a metre square, consistently flat trajectory at 1.5 kilometres, and it was known to knock off other tanks at 4.5, so they were a deadly weapon. And my father said that they'd see sometimes shells ricocheting off this thing as they're trying to manoeuvre to get out of the way, and they'd almost cry tears of frustration, and what they would do was call in. Oh, sorry, there's my uncle on the left there. He was also in tanks on D-Day as well, in Shermans, and my father on the right. They both survived. A bit battered, but they did survive. Battered mentally, and my uncle was severely physically wounded as well. They used to call in the Hawker Typhoon. It was their means of defence, and my father always used to say he'd rather have been up there than where he was down the ground. What he didn't realise, of course, was that from 1940 to 1945, 1,000 aircrew a week were being killed in Western Europe. 1,000 people. It just figures just boggles the mind. We can't even conceive it in these days. So if he'd known about that, he'd probably been happy to be down where he was. He started flying. We migrated to Australia in the late 50s, early 60s, and he started flying because he was envious of these people. He wanted to see what it was like. I went up with him, so got the bug, and so, you know, usual old thing. But at the time, I'd been in the Navy for a few years. I was a tradesman, looking after guns. It seemed we couldn't get away from wars and guns. My grandfather was in the First World War trenches, my uncle and father at Normandy, and subsequently me in Vietnam, and also me in the Navy. I was looking after big naval guns, so we seemed to be around guns all the time. I made sure my son had nothing to do with it. So I started flying, couldn't afford the cost of flying, decided to, since I was in the Navy, find some way of paying for it. And of course the logical way was to apply for pilot's course, and amazing to me, they accepted me. I was on 68 pilot's course after doing a knife and fork course at HMAS Cerberus early in the year. It was a, teach you how to use knives and forks and be a gentleman. My wife says they never succeeded. I was on 68 course. There was never a number 68 windshield. That's the big cardboard placards that they put on the front of it. I'm at the top, and there's somewhere, if anybody's interested, somewhere around there. Like I said before, I was never a natural pilot. I had to work really, really hard, as I think most people did. The people who really steamed through, we've had subsequently found, a lot of them went to, were stovies, a lot of them went to fighters, and a lot of them weren't successful pilots. It was generally the sloggers who had to know their aircraft, had to know their men, had to know themselves and their own limitations, who survived over the years. I've seen a lot of good people go by the wayside, as I've no doubt you have as well. We're the first course through on the MB326H, which has just been retired. The course after a 69 course was the last course through on the Vampires. When I went back to the Navy, I flew the Vampire as well, and it was just a completely amazingly different machine. The Vampire with its suck blow engine, no acceleration. This Mackie here with almost no power, but nice and smooth, but an excellent instrument platform. Just a few photographs there. There's a standard instrument platform layout, bit of formation flying. Me in the monkey suit. They always used to make us dress up in this fancy dress stuff. Never quite understood why. The back seat of the Mackie was the instrument platform. So you'd get in the back seat, it'd slide the hood forward, so you'd be totally IFR from the time you got in the machine. The instructor would taxi the machine out, line it up on the runway, give you the pedals, tell you what compass heading, you knew it already because of the runway, but in case there was some error, you'd take the throttles and away you'd go. And the next time you relinquish the controls was when you were on short finals, and they would take over. So it was a very good instrument training platform. I wish I could say I enjoyed it. I didn't. And from all the comments written underneath on the hood behind me, a lot of other people didn't enjoy it either. A lot of derogatory comments too. I went back to the Navy in 1969, and once again I was quite amazed. I passed, got my wings, got pilot's course, went back there, and it soon became apparent to me why they were letting so many people through. We were fought off for Vietnam. They wanted helicopter pilots for Vietnam. So after going back to Nara, I did a DC-3 conversion. I flew the S2E Vampire conversion, and then back onto the helicopters. This was the first helicopter I ever flew, the UH-1B, 11-seat helicopter, L11 engine, bit underpowered, but a good honest aircraft, a good honest aircraft to fly. And we used to do full auto, touchdown auto rotations in it. Thoroughly enjoyable. My instructor was a bloke called Jerry Hardy, a very personable young bloke, a instructor from the Royal Navy. He took me through my entire flight training on helicopters, which was about, once again, it was about 80 or 90 hours, so we didn't do too badly. He died in 1981 flying into Aberdeen in an S-76 when his aircraft threw a blade. Since the blades were balanced to about 2 or 3 grams normally, you can imagine what happens when it throws a 120 kilo blade. It would have been quite an experience. We thought ourselves very well trained. We did winch training, underslung work, instrument flying, night training, a lot of formation flying, and we worked with the troops, the Australian troops at Tianjara. I've worked with Australian troops over the years in many different places. Highest regard for them. Really, really top blokes, really professional, easy to work with people. When we hit Vietnam, I had a total time of about 450 hours, most of it fixed wing, a little bit on helicopters, these ones. We were high time pilots, would you believe it? High time pilots in Vietnam with 450 hours. Most of the Americans turning up there would have had about 120 to 150 hours. No instrument training, just basic keep yourself upright stuff. Very limited nighttime training, almost no formation training. And so they put them in the left-hand seat for 3 months, call them Peter pilots, while they try to keep themselves alive and you try to train them up to. So we had our captaincies within weeks. By this stage we're probably getting close to 500 hours. We were based in Phu Quoc, right down the south of Saigon, right the way down to the Ho Chi Minh, to the U Minh Forest, and across to the Cambodian border. It's a funny thing, but the invasion of Laos and Cambodia occurred while we were there, and we were on the airwaves all day, every day, and we never knew a thing about it. I was astounded when I came back to Australia to find what had happened while I was up there. Security was, I mean, just unbelievable. We flew an average probably 6 to 8 hours a day. My longest day was 14.5 hours flying, which was a 22-hour duty day. It was not unusual. If you had to fly, you flew. The machines were worked to the limits, literally to the limits, right to the ragged edge. And they were disposable. By this stage, I was flying the 205, the UH-1H, the old Huey, the one you always see in the film clips. I was flying I was a slick pilot. I wasn't a slick pilot, they were called slicks, and they were mainly used for combat assaults, that's inserting troops, and hash and trash. That's the Charlie model gunships. We had our own gunships. We were the Emus, the 135th Assault Helicopter Company. We had nothing to do with the Australians. Not many people know about us. There was about 10 pilots, 50 mechanics each year. Went to Vietnam. We were totally hived off to the Americans. We wore their uniforms, flew their aircraft. The only thing we did was a bit different, was occasionally we'd underslung loads of beer across the Vung Tau, usually Heineken rubbish, and for 2 sling loads of Heineken we'd get 1 pallet of VB, which was pretty good. We thought it was pretty good trade. The gunships were pretty impressive machines, machine guns, rockets, miniguns, very crude gun sights. Gun sight was a chinograph pencil put across on the windshield, push it over, fire the button, see where it landed, then make adjustments around that. But after that they'd get pretty accurate. Well, you'd hope that it'd get accurate because you'd be flying in 5-ship formations, transiting maybe 2 rotor spans distance, going in for the combat assault would come into half a rotor span, and that was day and night. And the reason for that was the gunships, being not all that accurate, wanted you nice and tight so they could put suppression underneath you, not have to do any accurate stuff. They just hose the area down below you. We'd be usually carrying South Vietnamese troops. Very rare for us to carry American troops, and they didn't want to be there, and a lot of the Americans didn't want to be there. We were professional aviators. We had been trained for it. We wanted to do it, but a lot of the Americans just did not want to be there, and I suspect nothing has much changed over the years. The non-volunteers were a danger to themselves, actually. Having said that, there were some very, very good, well-motivated and excellent pilots. I've got to keep moving on here. That was a photograph taken a mugshot. I'd come back from a 12-hour day, and they said, quick, we need a mugshot for the board, because they realised they didn't have one. So I stood up there and put my face up, they took a photograph, and I was feeling a bit shattered that day, and I didn't feel like smiling, so I didn't. Going out for hash and trash, we'd go, 1 aircraft each day would be hived off, or a dozen aircraft would be hived off, you go out by yourself, go to a certain province, pick up somebody, and you go and carry wheelbarrows, bodies, school children, medevacs, anything. You were just a flying garbage truck, which was could be interesting at times because you're still going to the same areas where they're doing the combat assaults, but without any backup. We had 2 M60 machine guns, 1 either side. Okay, so I survived Vietnam. We did. I was there for 11 months, flew 1,200 hours. By the time I got back to Australia, I literally was getting to be a high-time military type pilot, and being very grateful to survive too. You start employing your own techniques after a while, as I'm sure you'll all be aware of recognising danger signs, making sure you keep yourself safe. Went to fly the Wessex 31B. This was a pig of a machine. There's no 2 ways about it. Single engine, ASW, anti-submarine warfare type thing, off the carriers, off the Melbourne, out of Nowra. Had a Duncan sonar ball, weighed 200 weight, 400 foot of cable, and you go and sit in the ocean, open ocean, 15 to 25 feet, day and night, IFR and VFR, and with a simplex auto hover system, so the thing was constantly hunting to try and find a hover, and very often going out of authority. So it's not unusual to find yourself going up vertically through 400, 500, 600 feet, trying to get this ball out of the water. One bloke came back one day, pulled it out so fast, he'd come up, missed his rotor disc, wrapped around the starboard oleo, and he'd flown the machine back to Nowra. It was a terrible machine to fly. I flew the later version of this machine, the twin-engine Wessex, which I'll show you later on, which is a much different machine. I left the Navy in '74, went to fly for Bristow, went to Singapore, supposed to go to Malaysia, did a left turn, ended up in Sumatra doing heli rig work. About 400 loads, the largest was 4,250. The machine itself only weighed a bit under 6,000 pounds. Excuse me using pounds, you're probably all familiar, but all of our aircraft fuel gauges, even to this day, are in pounds. So obviously we're talking pounds. It's quite interesting, the big loads. The Huey 100% rotor RPM. Anybody here helicopter pilots? Hands up, helicopter pilots? No? My godfather. Right, okay, so a little bit of exotica there. The rotor RPM 100% is not the most efficient rotor RPM. It's there for safety, and that if you start decreasing your rotor RPM, centrifugal force will gradually start making your blades cone. Get it too low, the things will come up and clap hands, and you can start clapping at the same time because you're just about to say goodbye to your ass. So, so the rotor RPM is normally 100%, but if you can get it down to about 92%, the aircraft would lift about 300 to 400 pounds more. That's very important when you want a little bit of extra fuel to go somewhere, because some of those used to fly, that transportal behind there was a 35 knot load. So sometimes you'd be going for 2 hours with this thing at 35 knots, and the limitation was your tail rotor. So the supporter cabin would start swinging, you put in the option tail pedal to stop it, anti-yaw pedal to stop it swinging, stop it, and you then back the other way foot. So enormous strain on the airframe. We had a tail rotor vertical fin come off one day, but it was very bad for your back as well. You were very sore by the time you got back. But to get the big loads away, you had to droop your RPM down to 92%, which meant picking the machine up, checking your rate of decrease of RPM, working out whether you can get through translational before you lost it altogether, putting it down, beeping it up, and then going for it. Interesting flying. After a while it became second nature, but it was always very dramatic to people on the outside or people sitting in watching you. And of course you had the low rotor RPM warning light on, you had this machine staggering through the skies, and one pilot up front there with big eyes trying to get this machine away from the ground. Kept me very interested. I came back to Australia and they converted me to the Wessex 60. Beautiful machine, my first twin-engine machine. 15 hours, they said, take this machine to Borneo. I said, yes sir, off I went. An enormously powerful machine. Most twin-engine machines, as you know, have disgusting performance on one engine. This machine, you could pull 92% torque on one engine. Imagine what you could do on two. You could almost pop the transmission out. An enormously powerful machine. I know of 2 instances, and Joe will probably back me up on this one. I know of 2 instances where people actually took off with one engine either at idle or once in the North Sea where engine shut down and never realised it. One in the North Sea gave a mayday call because he thought it had an engine failure. A PAM call because he thought an engine failure, and realised he'd never started it. Well, that's the North Sea, you know, where cold temperatures, big winds and a strong aircraft. I left Broome in would have been 82 to go to Brunei. I had 15 hours on this machine. I went out to a rig off the Scott Reef, landed, refueled, came off. We talked about emergencies before. Lifted off the deck, had a governor run away up. So here I am trying to control this engine, which is trying to burn itself to death by pulling power, going like a rocket. Eventually, going through 3,000 feet, the engineer who's sitting beside me, Dick Jones, said, "Don't you think it's about time we shut that engine down?" I said, "Soon, soon, soon." You know, we're getting a bit of height under my bum, so I got about 4,000 or 5,000 feet and shut it down. But then I had 180 nautical miles to trot back to Australia on one engine, which we did. They changed the engine that night. Next day, off we go again. A few other experiences working up through the archipelago. Got to Tarakan. We'd had an oil leak, which we were trying to find for several days. And finally, Dick Jones, the engineer, said, "Look, I don't like this." He gets a cloth out, he starts developing a wipe and developing a spraying, trying to find this crack. Finds this crack in the transmission, starting nowhere, going nowhere. I'd say, from past experience, I've got probably maybe a few minutes before that transmission comes apart. I was very lucky, very, very lucky. Came back to Australia, we've got these other machines, the Pumas, 212s, and we're doing offshore for Woodside. It was our first contract, long-term contract for Woodside. Bristow Helicopter were nearly defunct in Australia at that stage. We were on our knees, we were down to a couple of machines, and we got the Woodside contract. As usual, they gave us the handoff, and we got the SA-330J. Cockpit, unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. Down here is the Lytton. VLF Omega navigation system, absolutely and utterly hopeless. You had to put the latitude and longitude of every point that you were leaving, transiting and going past every time you switched the aircraft on. It had no memory whatsoever. So you got very good at remembering latitude and longitudes. For instance, Karratha is 20428116463. You're thinking I'll give you the North Rankin and all the other ones too. Interesting machine to fly. Big suck blow engines, turbo 4Cs, no IGVs, no bleed bands, always trying to stall. Big amber light on the bottom right console, 76% light. If that light came on, you didn't pull power fast, you waited. But like with Vampires, you had to crack the throttle open, and just wait for the engines to spool up. If you didn't, they would stall, they'd stay down at some low RPM and just sit there surging, bang, 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 which would be very interesting since these machines were twin-engine Llamas designed for the French Air Force, Army, and used in the Alps. So they're used in conditions of high density altitude where you really do need your guide vans or your bleed bands or whatever device you're going to use to smooth the airflow. But a very honest machine, a very honest machine. And also used gunships. The only machine I ever saw with a G limitation on a helicopter, that is, 2.67 G. Very unusual. There we are at Karratha with all the machines we're using. Bit of formation. After Vietnam I used to love formation. I used to do formation whenever I could. Some people didn't like it. You'd see them hanging on the controls, looking straight ahead. Occasionally the aircraft we'd have failures. I had to go out this day and get this 206 had an engine failure. It was me slinging it back. Interesting picture on the right here. You're actually looking down through the hell hole, the centre of the Puma, looking down at the 206. Obviously there's nobody in it, so only being slung low. They used to let us use the machines for going fishing, which we did there, and much more casual flying. I used to fly in shorts and everything, but like health and safety being what it is, about mid-80s, late 80s, it all became a no-no and we started wearing long-sleeve shirts and all this garbage. Helicopter, may I say, it's a very useful tool if it's used in the right circumstance. If it's not, it's a waste of money. Putting those rubber buoys on those dolphins at Dampier cost them $1,750. The crane barge they hired to come in, which they shortly cancelled, was $120,000. So if you could do the job with a helicopter, usually you could do it much more cheaply, but not necessarily. I got into training in 1982, so I was moving all around the world with Bristow doing training for different bits and pieces. This was in Cambodia. I thought the sign was very amusing. And that's the SLORC up in Burma, the State Law and Order Restoration Council. Often thought if I had the courage to roll inverted and pull through, I could have saved Burma a lot of angst over the years, but of course I didn't. This was the military junta, which is mainly still in power, mob of butchers. Back to Vietnam, training Vietnamese pilots. Found them to be wonderful people, and really, really nice people. Quick learners. When you think that 80% of Vietnamese weren't born during the American War, as they call it, you realise that these people have no axe to grind, and they just don't remember it. It's just gone. So we're the ones with the hang-ups, and they're the ones with the with no problems at all. Saigon, still the same. Revetments, hangars, marks from where mortars hit, and Russian machinery. I also went up to New Guinea, flew a lot in New Guinea, doing underslung work, 100-foot line work with the Puma again, the 330J. That's at Poroma, 5,500 feet, about 6,500, 7,000 foot DA normally. Behind us, Mount Gilloway, 14,500 feet. It was not unusual when you're doing the crew changes. Bear in mind this is all VFR work. There's no IFR in New Guinea. If you go IFR in New Guinea, you're asking to commit suicide. You just don't go IFR in New Guinea. And many times I've been going around the flank of Gilloway, 10,000 feet on the clocks, 200 feet above ground level doing crew changes, knowing there's another 4,500 feet just to the west of me. It's interesting flying, interesting flying. It's like all flying. Once you're in the groove, once you know what you're doing, once you know the limitations of your aircraft, once you know the area and the capabilities of the people around you, then it doesn't become too much of a big deal. This machine I was flying, Pacific machine, looks a bit like a baby tug, doesn't it? Quite powerful, 3,600 horsepower in the two engines. We got a couple of the local engineers in one day and got them to the mechanics, the hangar boys, got them to put on their local gear and pose them up on the side of the aircraft doing a transmission change. Got to keep moving. Went to Nigeria, flew the 212 in Nigeria. Weather in Nigeria, typical tropical weather. Working in Nolman, and it was all VFR. Just as a matter of interest, the companies who work there set their own VFR minimums. Ours was 1 kilometre visibility, 200 feet minimum, half a kilometre visibility, 400 feet minimum. That's less than some ILS minimum. But somehow it worked, and it's all around the Delta. It's flat country. We're doing supporting oil rigs. That's the sort of country we're working over. There's a village here. There's a village just here, look if you notice. The beyond swamps. It's run by a mob. The whole area's tribe in there is called the Ijaw. They're financially disadvantaged, to put it mildly. Most of the oil money goes to the other place in Nigeria, and so they're always trying to get their share of the wealth. We used to fly to these swamp rigs, to the flow stations. Notice all the clear area down here. That's oil spill. This is Shell, but however all the pipelines are maintained by the NNPC, Nigerian National Petroleum Company, although Shell gets the blame for it. Probably quite rightfully too. Offshore work we used to do a fair bit of. Oil spills, pollution, horrendous. A sabotage pipeline, we're always trying to chase these people, but never caught them. And burn down a village. If a village got something they didn't have, they'd end up torching it. I finally got my hands on glass cockpit just before I left Nigeria, the EC-155. Beautiful machine, fast, smooth, had everything built in. It wasn't a military tack-on, it was a machine designed for the offshore market. Local labour, very good pilots by the way, folks, great to train, good people to work with. Helicopter people will be impressed with this, 11,000 feet, 138 knots indicated, so probably a TAS of about 160. Not bad for a helicopter. Also illegal, of course, 10,000 feet. Don't tell anybody. They ended up in the Solomon Islands after Nigeria. Interesting to the Solomon Islands to work once again for another company, but I came back to Bristow flying a 332. It's a fairly big helicopter, comes to 8.6 tonnes. Working with the Australian military and the Federal Police. I've not got a great deal to say about the Federal Police, not good, so I won't talk about that. But the Australian military were grand to work with, really good. They're there as a stabilisation force. So we were just doing medevac. We had the Puma. I'll show you a few photographs of the Solomons, we're getting close to the end. If you ever want a holiday and you're into diving, please go to the Solomons. It's only 3 hours out of Brisbane, worth seeing. Locals, Melanesians, kids. Cockpit of the 332, more kids. 7,500 foot behind Henderson Field on Honiara. And there's the machine, the 332. Very often we'd refuel out of drums. Had a capacity of just over 6,000 pounds, so refueling out of drums was a painful process. It took us a long time. Nice machine, with 6 hours endurance. We'd go from one end of the Solomons to the other, which we had to do because the Honiara is the only place with VOA NDB. We had dual Garmins, but they weren't TSO'd, well, for primary navigation IFR, so we had to carry alternate fuel back to Honiara, and we're the only people capable of doing it. So we used to go out at night very often, doing quite long trips. Cockpit on the left there, hangar, Honiara, it's all gone now, it's closed up. And there's the nav system and the radar on the Puma. As you can see, the panel's pretty bog standard. You know, really, if you look at the Second World War machine or the 60s machine and look at these sorts of machines, which are still flying, really there's no different apart from the avionics. The instruments are all almost the same, work the same. Henderson Field. Just the back of here is a ridge line, and on that ridge line for over a year sat a Japanese lieutenant in the Second World War, and he directed gunfire onto Henderson Field. That was his primary objective. He did survive the war. He walked the west of the island when the war was over, was picked up, and he died about 2 years ago in Japan. He was about 96 or 97. But just on the end of the airfield there, just there, is Bloody Ridge. And that's where the Japanese did their last, as you see, I'm interested in history, where the Japanese did their last full frontal attack ever. Up to 10,000 people were machine gunned there by the Americans. The Japanese, this was the end of the roll-up for the Japanese. The Battle of Coral Sea was just a bit to the southeast. Savo Island was just off the coast, and between Henderson and Savo Island is Iron Bottom Sound, so called because it's full of iron. There's just millions of tons of ships there, including the Australian cruiser the Canberra, which was taken in a surprise raid and sunk. This was one of the standard strips. There's another strip which is you can still see about 10 kilometres away, which was the bomber strip, and in between is a crash strip. So if you were coming back crippled, they didn't want you landing on any recognised strip. They had this special strip set up where you can go and park yourself, if you're lucky. But the history of the Solomons is really interesting, and unfortunately on this presentation I don't have a sign. The main airfield, which I wanted to show you, the main hotel is the Mendana, and it's owned by the Japanese. I talked to many Japanese people when I was there, and usually because I was interested in what they knew about the Solomon Islands, because this was the furthest point that the Japanese got. It was going to be a stepping off place for an invasion of Australia. So this is as far as they got, and it was a disaster for the Japanese. But everybody I spoke to, nobody has got a clue what happened there. They don't know about the Battle of Coral Sea, they don't know about Guadalcanal. It's just amazing. The Japanese do not teach history, and that frightens the living daylights out of me. It really scares the hell out of me. Just to the north of here is Malalai, and that was a field which was cleared by the Japanese. It's still there, still being used. They used about 3,000 prisoners of war, mainly from Changi. Australians, British, Malays, Chinese, and the usual thing happened to them when they finished making the strip. Just amazing. There's a bloke up there. His name escapes at the moment. Sorry, John Eno, yeah, sorry. He runs these tours around there, military tours. So if you ever go up there, he'll take you around and show you all the different battle sites. Lots of machinery, old rubbish hanging around. Just a few shots of the atoll to the western province. Over 500 kilometres of atoll. Just absolutely gorgeous country, just beautiful. And you know, there's been many rewards from aviation over the years, from seeing sites which I'm sure you people are familiar with, lifting off of a morning and taking off into a sunrise, lifting off into weather sometimes and all the different patterns, coming doing night flying, flying back at night, watching all the lights go past. I've absolutely loved every minute of it. I've been so grateful that I had managed to do it. But the biggest reward of all for me was that I've survived. And this